They say the truth will set you free, but they never tell you what that freedom will cost. I know the price, down to the last cent, down to the last tear, down to the last piece of my shattered heart. It cost me a house, a history, and the man I thought I knew. It cost me everything I had, and looking back now, from this side of the fire, I can tell you, it was the best and most terrifying bargain I ever made. This isn't a story about the end of a marriage. This is a story about the beginning of a life, my life, and the brutal, beautiful price of finally claiming it as my own. For 20 years, I lived in a museum. It looked like a house from the outside, a 2-story colonial with a welcoming red door and shutters the color of a summer sky. But inside, it was a carefully curated collection of a life I thought was ours. Every object held a story. The slightly chipped ceramic mug he brought me from a business trip to Seattle, the one I used every morning. The faded photograph on the mantelpiece from our honeymoon in Italy, 2 young people squinting in the Tuscan sun, convinced they had forever figured out. The worn leather armchair in the living room, molded perfectly to the shape of his body after thousands of evenings spent reading. Our life was a quiet, comfortable rhythm. The hum of the coffee maker in the morning, the shared crossword puzzle on Sunday, the comfortable silence of 2 people who had known each other for half a lifetime. It was a security so profound, so baked into the foundation of my identity, that I never thought to question it. It was the air I breathed. I was one half of we, a single entity that moved through the world with a shared past and a guaranteed future. I had built my entire world on that certainty, on that single, solid plot of ground. But a foundation built on a lie is just sand and dust, waiting for the first tremor. And my tremor didn't come with a roar. It came with a quiet digital ping. He'd left his phone on the kitchen counter, screen up, while he was out mowing the lawn. It was a Saturday. The sun was streaming through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. I was humming, chopping vegetables for a salad we'd eat for lunch. And then, the screen lit up, a name I didn't recognize, and a message that was not for me, but was about me. It was only a few words, but they were a wrecking ball. In that single, silent moment, the museum I lived in shattered. The artifacts became props. The memories became evidence of a crime. The man outside, the one pushing the lawnmower in neat, predictable lines, became a stranger. The initial shock wasn't a wave of anger. It was a cold, hollowing void. It was the sickening realization that the air I'd been breathing for 20 years was poison. The pain was physical. A fist clenched in my gut, a pressure in my chest so intense, I thought my heart would stop. That was the first crack in the foundation. But the earthquake was just beginning. The real devastation, the true cost, wasn't in the betrayal itself, it was in what came next. The word divorce hung in the air between us for weeks, a toxic cloud we both pretended not to see. He was sorry, he said. It was a mistake, he said. But the words were hollow, echoes in the ruins of what we once had. The trust was gone, pulverized into dust. And when I finally said the word out loud, when I finally gave voice to the unthinkable, the man who had cried at our wedding and held my hand through 1,000 nights transformed. The husband was gone. In his place was an adversary. Our first meeting with the lawyers was in a sterile conference room downtown. The table was long and polished, reflecting the strained, pale faces of 2 people who had once shared a bed and now couldn't even make eye contact. My life, our life, 20 years of love and labor and laughter, was laid out on that table in a stack of financial statements and property deeds. It was the beginning of the ugliest education I never wanted. No one tells you about this part. They talk about the heartbreak, the sadness of a love lost. They don't tell you about the systemic, soul-crushing humiliation of division. They don't tell you that your shared history will be converted into an Excel spreadsheet, with columns for asset, value, and proposed distribution. The silver candlesticks my grandmother gave us for our wedding? Itemized. The worn-out sofa we bought for our first apartment, the one where we dreamed up our future, assigned a market value of $200. Our home, the museum of our life, was no longer a sanctuary. It was the primary asset, a number to be fought over. Every memory was monetized, every dream was given a price tag, and the subtext of every negotiation was clear. I was being punished. I was the one who refused to accept the lie, and now I would pay for it. He had the better lawyer, the one who saw this as a game of chess. My first lawyer saw me as a file number, a sad, emotional woman to be managed. He advised me to be reasonable, which was code for give up. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake in the guest room, the silence of the house deafening. I'd stare at the ceiling and be consumed by a terror so absolute, it felt like drowning. How would I survive? I had been a partner for my entire adult life. My name was on the accounts, but he had always managed the money. Now that shared resource was being used as a weapon, a way to bleed me dry until I surrendered. The pressure was immense. Just sign the papers, friends would say, the ones who hadn't quietly picked his side. Just accept the offer, so you can move on. They meant well, but they didn't understand. The offer wasn't just about money, it was about my worth. It was a number that was meant to tell me what 20 years of my life, my contribution, my sacrifice, was worth. And the number was an insult. It was designed to break me, to leave me with just enough to be quiet, but not enough to be free. This was the price I was being asked to pay, my dignity for my peace. I remember the day I hit the bottom. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store, holding a settlement offer in my trembling hands. It was a fraction of what was fair, a pittance for 2 decades of my life. I could feel the tears welling up, the familiar wave of despair washing over me. I could sign it. I could make the bleeding stop. I could end the phone calls, the meetings, the sleepless nights. I could have peace. But it would be the peace of the defeated. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were hollow. My face was pale. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She was a ghost, haunted by the life she used to have. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a roar. It was a whisper. A tiny, flickering flame in the darkness. Not like this. I will not be erased. That quiet no was the first act of rebellion. It was the beginning of a war. One decided to fight, not for the money, but for myself. The next day, I fired my lawyer. I found a woman, a fighter, who looked me in the eye and saw a person, not a problem. When she spoke, she didn't talk about being reasonable. She talked about what was right. She validated the anger, and the hurt I had been told was, quote, too emotional. She gave me back my voice. It wasn't easy. The fight got uglier. More depositions, more threats, more moments where I wanted to crumble. But this time, something was different. I was no longer just a victim of my circumstances. I was a soldier in my own army. The courage wasn't a constant roaring fire. It was a choice I had to make every single morning. The choice to get out of bed. The choice to answer the phone. The choice to walk into another sterile conference room, hold my head high, and speak my truth. I started documenting everything, not just the finances, but my contributions. The years I'd put my own career on hold. The thousands of unpaid hours of managing a home, raising a family, supporting his ambitions. I was building a case not just for my lawyer, but for myself. I was reminding myself of my own value, a value that couldn't be entered into a spreadsheet. I was fighting for more than a house. I was fighting for the right to be the architect of my own future, and I would not let him build it on a foundation of rubble. The day the divorce was finalized, there was no celebration. There was just a profound, echoing silence. I walked out of the courthouse, the papers signed, the war over. I had won. I had gotten a fair settlement, my share of the life I had helped build, but I felt empty. I drove not to the house that was no longer mine, but to a small, empty rental apartment on the other side of town. The walls were stark white, the rooms smelled of fresh paint, and my few belongings looked small and lost in the space. That first night, I sat on the floor because I didn't own a chair, and I ate cereal out of a box because I hadn't unpacked the dishes. And I cried. I cried for the life I had lost, for the woman I used to be, for the future that had been stolen. The silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of my new life. The sound of one. The reconstruction was not a glamorous movie montage. It was a slow, messy, and often painful process of learning to live again. It was the strange, new math of a grocery cart built for one person. It was the jolt of panic in the middle of the night, when I heard a strange noise and realized there was no one else in the house. It was learning to be my own handyman, my own financial planner, my own cheerleader. I remember buying a bookshelf from IKEA. It came in a flat box with 1,000 tiny pieces and a wordless, confusing instruction manual. I spent an entire Saturday on the floor of my living room, trying to assemble it. I got frustrated, I put pieces in backward, I stripped a screw, and at one point, I just sat on the floor and sobbed with sheer, helpless frustration. It felt like a metaphor for my entire life. A box of broken pieces with no clear instructions on how to put them back together. But then, I took a deep breath, wiped my tears, and started again. And late that night, when I finally slid the last shelf into place and stood the wobbly but functional bookshelf against the wall, a feeling of triumph washed over me. It was more than a piece of furniture. It was proof. I could do this. I could build something new, by myself, from the ground up. Slowly, the small victories started to add up. I took my first solo road trip, driving up the coast with the windows down and my own music playing as loud as I wanted. The first night in a motel by myself was terrifying. But the next morning, watching the sunrise over the ocean, I felt a sense of freedom so vast and exhilarating it brought tears to my eyes. I started rediscovering parts of myself I had packed away for 20 years. I started painting again, something I'd loved in college but had given up because it was messy. I filled my small apartment with canvases, with color, with my own creations. I reconnected with old friends, the ones who had known me before I was a wee. They reminded me of the funny, adventurous, and ambitious woman I had been. My dreams hadn't died in the divorce. They had just been dormant, waiting for the light. The silence in my apartment was no longer deafening. It became peaceful. It became the space where I could hear my own thoughts, listen to my own heart, and finally, truly, get to know myself. Today, I live in a house that is much smaller than the one I left, but every single thing in it is mine. It's filled with my messy paintings, my favorite books and photos of my new life, my new adventures. My bank account might have fewer zeros than it once did, but my personal net worth, my sense of self, my resilience, my peace, is immeasurable. I carry the scars of that war. They are a roadmap etched onto my soul, a reminder of every battle fought and every tear shed. But I no longer see them as signs of damage. I see them as proof of my strength. Proof that I survived. The price of my freedom was steep. It was paid in sleepless nights, in public humiliation, and in the agonizing process of dismantling a life. But what I gained in return is priceless. I gained self-knowledge. I gained an unshakable independence. I gained the profound and life-altering certainty that I am whole, all by myself. I am not the woman who survived a divorce. That woman is gone. I am the woman who was born from it. I learned that sometimes you have to let your old life burn to the ground, because it's from the ashes that you can build something far more beautiful, far more honest, and far more true. You can build a life that is finally and completely your own. And that is a freedom worth any price. It's strange, isn't it, how a life can be built on a single moment, a single glance. Before the lawyers, before the spreadsheets, before the silence, there was a beginning. And our beginning was quiet. It happened in the hushed cathedral of a university library, the kind with towering shelves and windows so tall they seemed to reach for the heavens. The air smelled of old paper and dust motes danced in the afternoon light. It was a place of stories, and I had no idea ours was about to be written. I was looking for a place to study, my arms overloaded with books. Every table was taken, except for one spot opposite a young man completely absorbed in his work. He had this intensity about him, a focused energy that was magnetic. His brow was furrowed in concentration, and he was chewing on the end of his pen. When I asked if the seat was free, he looked up, and the intensity just melted. His eyes were a warm, gentle brown, and they crinkled at the corners when he smiled. It wasn't a dazzling movie star smile. It was something better. It was genuine. It was a smile that said, "You're welcome here." That was my first impression of him. He was a safe harbor. In a world that felt loud and complicated, he was calm. He was thoughtful. He listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak, his words had weight. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just himself. Ambitious, yes, but with a quiet humility that I found so rare. He talked about wanting to build things, not just a career, but a life of meaning. He made me feel seen, in a way I hadn't realized I was craving. He didn't just hear my words, he heard the hopes and fears tucked away behind them. I was drawn to his steadiness. He felt like bedrock, like a foundation you could build a future on. I thought I had found the one truly good man. I remember one afternoon, a few months after we started dating. It was a crisp autumn day, the kind where the air is clean and the leaves are on fire with color. He took me to a park overlooking the city. He'd packed a clumsy picnic in a backpack, squashed sandwiches, a slightly bruised apple, and a thermos of coffee that was already lukewarm. It was imperfectly perfect. We sat on a scratchy wool blanket, and we didn't just talk, we dreamed out loud. We mapped out our futures on that blanket, our words weaving together until his dreams and my dreams became our dreams. As the sun started to dip below the skyline, painting everything in gold and rose, he turned to me. He took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. He didn't say "I love you." He said something that felt even bigger, more permanent. He looked at me, with that same genuine smile from the library, and said, "With you, I feel like I'm already home." In that moment, looking at the city lights beginning to twinkle below us, I believed him. I believed in that promise with every fiber of my being. I believed we were building a home that could weather any storm. I had no idea the storm was him. That feeling of being home wasn't just a metaphor, it became the blueprint for our life. The transition from dating to marriage wasn't a question of no ISA, but when. It felt as natural and inevitable as the changing of the seasons. The proposal, when it came, wasn't on a mountaintop or in a fancy restaurant. It was perfectly, wonderfully us. We had just signed the lease on our first apartment, a tiny one-bedroom with crooked floors and a view of a brick wall. The place was completely empty, echoing with every footstep. The air smelled of stale paint and possibility. We were sitting on the floor, sharing a pizza out of the box because we didn't own a table, let alone plates. We were talking about what color to paint the bedroom, where we'd put a bookshelf, how we'd make this little box into a home. He suddenly went quiet. He looked around the empty room. Then he looked at me, and that same gentle smile I first saw in the library spread across his face. He said, "You know, we could buy all the furniture in the world, and it wouldn't make this place a home. You've already done that just by being here." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. There was no grand speech. He didn't even get down on one knee. He just opened the box and said, "Will you make every room I'm in for the rest of my life feel like this?" It was the easiest yes I have ever said. The first few years of our marriage were a blur of beautiful, ordinary work. We were a team, united against the world, with a shared vision. Our dream wasn't extravagant, it was solid. It was a house with a yard, a dog, 2 children. It was him climbing the ladder in his career, a path I supported with every ounce of my being. I became the editor of his reports, the hostess for his work dinners, the steady presence he could always come home to. We were building an empire, not of money, but of life. A life of substance and security. We bought that colonial with the red door, and we poured our weekends into it. I remember us, covered in paint, laughing until our sides hurt as we tried to hang wallpaper straight. I remember planting a tiny maple tree in the front yard, and him putting his arm around me, saying, "One day, our kids will climb this." Every decision was a we. Every plan was an our. Our happiness wasn't in grand gestures, but in the million tiny moments that stitched the fabric of our life together. It was in the way he'd bring me coffee in bed every morning, just the way I liked it. It was in the Sunday afternoons spent doing nothing but reading side by side on the sofa. It was the quiet understanding that passed between us in a crowded room, a secret language that belonged only to us. It was a comfortable, secure love. A love I believed was indestructible. If I had to pinpoint the moment that symbolized the absolute peak of that love, the memory I held up as our defining truth, it would be during the big blackout of '03. A massive storm had knocked out power to the entire region. The world outside was chaos, but inside our little house, a strange magic took hold. The humming of the refrigerator, the glow of the television, the digital clocks, all of it was gone. We were plunged into a profound silence, a deep, velvety darkness. Our daughter was only a toddler then, and she was scared of the dark, so he built a fort in the living room out of blankets and sofa cushions. We lit a dozen candles, their flickering light making the room feel like a sacred secret cave. There was no email to check, no calls to make, no distractions. There was only the three of us. He started telling our daughter a story, a wild, imaginative tale about a family of fireflies who had to save the moon. I just watched him, his face illuminated by the candlelight, his voice soft and captivating. In that moment, he was everything. He was the protector, the storyteller, the center of our tiny universe. Later, after our daughter had fallen asleep between us, we lay there in the quiet, listening to the rain against the windows. He reached for my hand in the darkness. "This is what matters," he whispered. "Right here. Just us." There was no doubt in his voice. There was no hesitation. It was a moment of absolute clarity, of pure, undiluted connection. We were a fortress against the storm, a self-contained world of light and love. I held on to that memory for years. It was my proof. It was the foundation upon which I had built everything. It was the ultimate truth of our love. Or, so I believed. I never imagined that the man who created that safe, warm light could also be the one to plunge my world into a darkness from which I thought I would never recover. Looking back, the end didn't begin with the ping of that text message. That was just the sound of the building collapsing. The demolition had started long before, quietly, methodically, in the foundation of our life. It wasn't a sudden earthquake, it was a slow, creeping rot. The first sign was the silence. The comfortable silence we once shared, the one filled with unspoken understanding, began to feel heavy, full of things unsaid. It was the silence of a stranger sitting across the dinner table, no longer the man whose thoughts I used to finish. Then came his phone. It had always been just an object, left on the counter, on the nightstand. Suddenly, it was an extension of his hand. It was angled away from me on the table. It was taken into the bathroom. It had a new password for work security. When I'd ask who he was texting so late, the answer was always the same dismissive sigh. "It's just work, honey. You wouldn't understand." He said it with a weary kindness that was somehow more cutting than anger. It was a verbal pat on the head, designed to make me feel small, intrusive, and foolish for even asking. The real cracks, the ones that started to splinter my sanity, were not in what he did, but in how he made me feel. The man who had once made me feel seen now looked right through me. I remember one evening, I'd planned a special dinner, hoping to reconnect, to find our way back to that blanket in the park. I put on a dress he liked. I opened a bottle of our favorite wine. He came home late, dropped his briefcase by the door, and walked past the candlelit table without a glance. He just mumbled, "Long day," and went upstairs to change. When he came back down, he saw the effort I'd made, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt, maybe. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a wall of defense. "You know I'm swamped at work," he said, his voice flat. "You shouldn't have gone to all this trouble." It wasn't an apology. It was an accusation. My effort was a burden. My love was an inconvenience. I spent the rest of that dinner pushing food around my plate, my throat tight with tears I refused to let fall. The manipulation was a masterclass in subtlety. He never raised his voice, he never called me names. Instead, he used my love for him as a weapon against me. When I would try to talk about the distance between us, my voice trembling with a hurt I couldn't contain, he would turn it around with surgical precision. "I think you're just being a little paranoid," he'd say gently, taking my hand. "We're fine, you're just tired. Maybe you're stressed." He would frame my legitimate pain as an emotional overreaction, a failing on my part. I was too sensitive, too needy. He was just busy, just stressed, just a man trying to provide for his family. He made me believe that the cold I felt was a fever in my own mind. I started to question my own reality. Was I imagining it? Was I the problem? I became a detective in my own home, a ghost in my own marriage, searching for clues to a crime I was being told hadn't even happened. The ultimate betrayal wasn't just the affair. The affair was almost a mercy compared to the psychological warfare that preceded it. The true cruelty was in the slow, deliberate erosion of my self-worth. It was in him, watching me blame myself, watching me try harder, watching me bend myself into knots to become a woman he might love again, all while knowing he had already given that love to someone else. He let me believe I was going crazy. He let me think I was failing our marriage. He watched me grieve for a life he had already secretly abandoned. That Saturday, when he left his phone on the counter, it wasn't an accident. Looking back, I think it was a subconscious act of cowardice. He didn't have the courage to tell me the truth, so he left the evidence out like a loaded gun, waiting for me to find it and pull the trigger for him. And when I saw that message, that wrecking ball of a few simple words, the first feeling wasn't just pain, it was a sickening, horrifying clarity. It was the moment all those little fractures, all those confusing conversations, all those lonely nights snapped into focus. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't needy. I wasn't crazy. I was right. My intuition had been screaming at me for months, and I had let him convince me it was a liar. The betrayal wasn't just that he had been with another woman. It was that he had taken my reality, my sanity, and deliberately, methodically, tried to dismantle it. And that was a cruelty far deeper than infidelity. It was the beginning of a war for my own mind. For 2 weeks after I found the message, we lived in a Cold War. We were two armed nations, sharing a border, moving through the house with a brittle, dangerous politeness. We slept in the same bed, a chasm of icy sheets between us. He was apologetic, in a vague, detached way. He was sorry I was hurt. He was sorry I found out. He never seemed sorry for what he had actually done. He was waiting for me to absorb the blow, to cry it out, and then, to forgive. He was waiting for the woman he had trained for 20 years to do what she always did. Smooth things over, keep the peace, and put the we back together. The final straw wasn't a shout. It was a sentence, delivered with the calm, condescending patience of a doctor explaining a terminal diagnosis. We were in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had seen the message. I hadn't been able to eat for days. I was just moving things around, cleaning counters that were already clean. He came and stood behind me, placing his hands on my shoulders. I flinched, a full-body recoil. He sighed, a sound of profound disappointment in me. "You know," he said, his voice dripping with a false, therapeutic gentleness, "an affair is often a symptom of a larger problem in the marriage. Maybe we should look at what was missing for tries that made this happen." There it was, the final, masterful twist of the knife. It wasn't his betrayal. It was our problem. My pain was an inconvenience, a symptom to be managed. My shattered heart was a larger problem we needed to workshop, as if it were a quarterly business review. In that moment, the last flicker of hope I didn't even know I was holding onto was extinguished. I turned around, and for the first time, I saw him not as my husband, but as a hostile stranger wearing his face. The word came out of my mouth before I even decided to say it. It was cold and heavy, like a stone. "I want a divorce." I said it quietly, without tears or anger. It was just a fact. "The sky is blue. Water is wet. Our marriage is over." He blinked. For a split second, I saw shock, then disbelief. He actually thought he could fix this, that he could manage me back into compliance. And when he realized I was serious, the mask of the concerned husband didn't just slip. It evaporated. His face hardened. The warmth in his eyes went out. The adversary I would come to know so well was born in that instant. "Fine," he said, his voice suddenly sharp, metallic. "If that's what you want, but you have no idea what you're about to start." It wasn't a lament. It was a threat. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. He didn't move out right away. Instead, He became a ghost in our home, a constant, silent reminder of my failure. He'd leave his legal papers on the dining room table for me to see. He'd take phone calls with his lawyer in the next room, speaking just loud enough for me to hear words like unreasonable and alimony. Friends stopped calling. Invitations to dinner parties, once addressed to us as a couple, simply ceased. I learned quickly that in a divorce there is no neutral ground. People don't want to be caught in the crossfire, so they retreat. The isolation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest day and night. The night he finally packed a bag was surreal. We didn't speak a word. I just stood at the top of the stairs and watched him walk out the red door we had painted together, closing it softly behind him. The click of the latch echoed through the house like a gunshot. And then, silence. A silence so complete, so absolute, it was all I could hear for weeks. He had promised me a war, and he was a man of his word. The divorce was not amicable. It was a strategic, brutal campaign designed to exhaust and humiliate me into submission. Our life, our shared history, was dissected and itemized on a spreadsheet by lawyers who charged $700 an hour. The primary battleground was the house, our home. He argued that since he was the primary breadwinner, it was fundamentally his. My 20 years of unpaid labor, as a mother, a household manager, an entertainer of his clients, the editor of his ambitions, were dismissed as a lifestyle contribution. It had no monetary value. It didn't count. The lowest point came during my deposition. It was held in a windowless conference room that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. I sat at one end of a long, polished table. He sat at the other, next to his lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit. My husband, the man who once whispered, "This is what matters in the dark," just stared straight ahead, his face a blank mask, as his lawyer began the interrogation. He asked me about my spending habits over the last decade. He brought up a vacation I took with my sister 5 years earlier, implying it was frivolous. He asked me to justify every major purchase, every decision, framing me as an irresponsible, emotional woman who couldn't be trusted with finances. He was painting a picture of me as a spoiled freeloader, and my husband just sat there and let him. He never looked at me. Not once. I felt my entire life, my entire identity as a partner, being systematically dismantled, redefined as worthless, and I had never felt so utterly and completely alone. The day I signed the final papers was gray and overcast, the sky the color of ash. I met my lawyer at her office. The documents were thick, a heavy stack of paper that represented the legal dissolution of a life. I sat there, staring at the final page, at the line next to my name. This was it, the end of the war. My lawyer slid a pen across the table. It felt impossibly heavy in my hand. I thought I would feel relief. I thought I would feel a surge of victory. But as I signed my name, the name he had given me 20 years ago, all I felt was a profound and bottomless sorrow. A tear I didn't know was coming dripped onto the paper, smudging the ink. It was a tear for the 2 young people on a blanket in the park, dreaming of a future they would never have. It was a tear for the man who built a fort in the dark to make his daughter feel safe. It was a tear for the woman I had been, the one who believed so completely in the promise of home. I pushed the papers back across the table. It was done. I was free. But as I walked out of that building into the cold, gray afternoon, I wasn't celebrating. I was just a survivor, standing alone in the rubble, with no idea how to begin to build again. The first few months were a study in silence. The silence of a 1-bedroom apartment is different from the silence of a big, empty house. It's closer. It presses in on you. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, convinced I'd heard a noise, only to be met with the profound, suffocating stillness of being utterly alone. The grief was a physical presence, a ghost that sat with me at my tiny kitchen table, that followed me from room to room. It was the grief for the man I thought I'd married, but it was also the grief for the woman I had been, the woman who believed in forever. She was gone, and I missed her. But in that silence, other sounds began to emerge, faintly at first, then with more confidence. There was the sound of my own thoughts, no longer needing to be filtered or justified. There was the sound of music he would have hated, playing loud on a Tuesday morning. One day, I bought a can of paint, a brilliant, unapologetic teal, and I painted the living room wall. I didn't ask for an opinion, I just did it. And as I rolled the color over the sterile white, covering the emptiness with something vibrant and alive, I felt the first real tremor of joy. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was something more fundamental. It was agency. It was the realization that this small world was mine to create. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was a spiral. I'd have days where I felt strong, where I'd hike a new trail or have a laughing, wine-fueled dinner with an old friend, and I'd think, I'm doing it. I'm moving on. And then a song would come on the radio, or I'd see a couple holding hands in the grocery store, and I'd be right back in the rubble, weeping in my car. I finally found a therapist, a woman with kind eyes, who didn't offer platitudes. She gave me a safe space to be angry, to be broken, to rage against the injustice of it all without being told I was too emotional. She helped me see that the gaslighting had been so insidious, I had started doing it to myself. She gave me the tools to dismantle the lies he had built in my head, one by one. I started painting again, pulling out my old canvases and brushes. At first, it was just angry slashes of black and red. But slowly, color started to creep back in. My little apartment, once a symbol of my loneliness, became my studio, my sanctuary. It was messy and chaotic, and filled with the beautiful, imperfect evidence of my own rebirth. Today, my life is quiet, but it's a different kind of quiet. It's the peaceful quiet of a life lived on my own terms. I live in a small cottage with a little garden out back. It's half the size of the house I left, but it feels infinitely larger because every inch of it is mine. The walls are covered in my paintings. The bookshelves are overflowing with books I want to read. The mug I drink my coffee from every morning is one I bought for myself, on a solo trip I took to the mountains just because I could. My routine isn't dictated by anyone else's schedule. Some mornings I wake up and paint with the sunrise. Other nights I stay up late reading, with no one to tell me to turn off the light. The woman I am now understands that strength isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and doing it anyway. I've learned that I am far more capable than I ever gave myself credit for. I can fix a leaky faucet, manage my own investments, and navigate the world not as one half of a whole, but as a complete person. I've learned that true love doesn't diminish you. It makes space for you to grow. It doesn't ask you to be smaller, quieter, or less yourself. Have I forgiven him? That's a complicated question. I don't think forgiveness is about absolving someone of what they did. I will never forget the cruelty, the lies, the deliberate dismantling of my spirit. But I have forgiven the hold it had on me. I've stopped carrying the weight of the anger. It was a poison, and I chose to stop drinking it. Forgiveness for me was the final act of taking my power back. It was saying, your actions will no longer write my story. The rest of these pages are mine. As for the future, for the first time in my life, it feels like a blank canvas and I am the artist. I'm not searching for a new love to complete me. The most important relationship I needed to repair was the one I have with myself, and we're in a really good place. If love comes again, it will be an addition to a life that is already full, not a solution to a life that is empty. It will be a partnership of two whole people, not two broken halves. For now, I am focused on my work, my friendships, my art. I am focused on the simple, profound joy of being the sole author of my own life. I look in the mirror now, and I don't see a victim, I don't see a divorcee. I see a woman who walked through fire and didn't just survive. She learned to create her own light. And that is a masterpiece worth a lifetime of work. If I could reach back through time, back to that sunlit kitchen, and speak to the woman I was, just moments before the world broke in half, what would I say? I see her so clearly. Humming a little tune, completely unaware that she was standing at the edge of a cliff. I wouldn't warn her about the message. I wouldn't tell her to run. She had to walk through that fire. There was no other way to get to the other side. No, I wouldn't warn her. I would just stand behind her, place a hand on her shoulder, and whisper this. The pain that is coming will feel absolute. It will feel like the end of everything. You will believe you are not strong enough to survive it. But you are. The foundation that is about to shatter is not the foundation of you. It is just a house you lived in. You, my dear, are the bedrock. You are the earth itself. And deep within you, beneath the grief and the fear, there is a quiet, steady voice. It's been silenced for a long time, but it's there. Listen for it. When the world is screaming at you to be reasonable, to give in, to disappear, that voice will whisper, no, trust that voice. It will be your compass. It will be the single flicker of light that guides you all the way home to yourself. And to you, the one who might be listening to this right now from your own version of that shattered kitchen. The one who is lying awake in a deafening silence, consumed by a terror of the future. The one who feels erased, devalued, and utterly alone. Please, hear me. Your story is not over. This devastation you feel is not your epilogue. This is the plot twist that allows for the real story, Moo to Your Fee story, to finally begin. They will try to tell you what your life, your contribution, your love was worth. They will put it on a spreadsheet, they will assign it a number. Do not, for 1 second, believe them. Your worth is not in a bank account or a property deed. Your worth is in the quiet courage it takes to get out of bed each morning, when your heart feels like a stone in your chest. It is in every tear you cry and every small step you take forward. It is in the ferocious, unbreakable spirit that is insisting, even now, that you deserve more than a life built on a lie. The price of your freedom will be high. It will cost you tears and sleep and friendships. But the alternative, the cost of staying, of shrinking, of silencing that voice inside you, is infinitely higher. It will cost you your soul. The journey back to yourself is not a straight line. It is messy, and it is hard. But it is the most sacred work you will ever do. So let it burn. If you must, let the old life burn to the ground. Because I promise you, from the other side of the fire, that the ashes make for the most fertile ground. And from that ground, you will build a life that is so deeply, so authentically, so breathtakingly your own. You will become the architect of a world where you are not just a resident, but the foundation, the walls, and the light streaming in through every window. And that freedom, that glorious, hard-won freedom, is worth any price.